Hello everyone, Juan Martinez here again, Century21 Americana Real Estate School. Another question here, and this is a follow-up from 4 months ago that I did a video about what does a listing agent do. So today we're going to talk about what a buyer agent does, okay? And it's a question that we also receive, we get all the time. So when I think of the word buyer's agent, okay, there's two things that I think of. A real estate agent that works with a buyer. As an independent contractor, they're not on a team, they're just out there and they're servicing buyers. You have the listing agent, you have the buying agent. And in many cases, a lot of agents do both. They go after sellers, they go after buyers. Something very common though is that with a real estate agent, usually they're doing more of one than the other, okay? But a good rounded agent is servicing both all buyers and sellers. However, when it comes to lead generation and an agent that lead generates every day and goes out and looks for business and is hustling, usually they're focused on one or the other. So buyer's agent, let's get back to that. There's also a buyer's agent where, let's say I'm a team leader, I have a team, I'm the listing agent and the team leader, and then I may have 2, 3, or 4 showing agents on the team. Now, in many cases, we call them a buyer's agent, showing agent or buyer's agent. And so I would say there's 2 types of buyer's agents out there, just your typical real estate agent that serves buyers, and then you have a buyer agent that would be on a team and is a team member, and then typically the team lead is the listing agent. So let's just talk only about one today, and that's just being a buyer's agent in the market, as an independent contractor, as a real estate agent, as a realtor. So what does a buyer's agent do? So in many cases, the buyer agent, of course, they gotta prospect for business. Maybe they're doing open houses, maybe they're knocking doors, maybe they're doing just listed calls, maybe they're just going out looking for business, maybe they have a big center of influence and business is driven to them, or they reach out to their center of influence or past clients. Either way, somehow, some way, they connect with the buyer. It also could be through social media, it could be advertising, it could be marketing. There's all kinds of ways to produce a buyer lead. Once you have the buyer lead, you're gonna talk to the customer, you're gonna ask questions, hey, what are you looking for? What price range are you in? Tell me a little bit more. What is your criteria? How many bedrooms? Asking all the qualifying questions, right? And what is important to the customer, what is the time frame that they want to do. There's a lot of questions that you have to ask to be able to dig deep and see ultimately what the motivation is of the buyer. Once the buyer and the buying agent have that conversation and the buyer wants to move forward, then the next step for the buyer agent is to make recommendations on the lending side. Unless the buyer is paying cash, typically the buyer needs to get approved with a lender. Now the buyer may have their own preferred lender or bank that they work with, and that's perfectly fine. Or typically a buyer agent will make 2 or 3 recommendations on a bank that a buyer can go to and get qualified. So the buyer gets qualified and goes through the qualifying process, make sure that they get approved, they produce financials for the mortgage lender or mortgage broker, and then once they are qualified, then they come back to the buying agent, and typically buying agent should have that buyer come in and then do a consultation. Hey, this is how this works, this is a price, this is a cost, this is what's in the MLS, this is what's available to go show, and they go through a series of questions and thoughts inside of that presentation. Once that happens, the buyer agent looks up properties in the MLS system, okay, and identifies properties to show the buyer. At that point, the buyer and the buyer agents get together and they go out and start looking for properties. You identify a property, you get back to the office, you write the offer up, you put the pre-approval from the lender, maybe a little letter for the other agent, for the listing agent, and you submit an offer for the buyer to the listing agent, and that is the listing agent of the property that you saw. Offer gets sent out, hopefully the listing agent responds. Let's say the seller and buyer come to an agreement on price. At that point, you get a fully executed contract, and then you move into escrow. Once you open up escrow and your buyer puts an earnest money deposit down, then as a buyer agent, now you have to work through that escrow to make sure everything is done right, the documents, inspections, and appraisal, and then ultimately the walkthrough. So in your first 10 days, typically in the 10 days, you're gonna have home inspection done, and you're gonna have the home inspector check the property, make sure there isn't any foundation issues or major issues going on with the home. The buyer needs to be informed on the inspection of what is happening, and then the buyer decides whether they want to move forward or not. Typically they do. Sometimes if there's some discrepancies or things that need to be corrected, the seller corrects, the seller may give the buyer the credit, whatever it is, but they come to an agreement. At the same time, the lender is in the back working the loan and making sure that the buyer is getting fully qualified and pushing that through the processor and then the underwriter so that they can successfully close by the close of escrow. So you do the inspection, then the appraisal goes out. Then they value the property. They make sure that what the buyer's paying for the home and what the seller agreed to on price, the bank wants to make sure that the appraised value comes in at that price. Once that is done, then you move towards the walkthrough. The walkthrough is to make sure that the property is still intact and everything that they saw when they first looked at the property, everything is still there, and that the seller left the property in good condition. Then you move to close. And then when you move to close, the buyer agent meets with the buyer, in many cases at the title company, signs off on everything, signs off on their loan docs, and then usually within a couple days the property records, and then the buyer agent is handing the keys over to the buyer, and then you have a successful close of escrow, and typically a very happy buyer who is receiving their home. So that is the buyer agent's responsibility. Now let me share with you, how many buyers can you serve in a 12-month period? I have seen over the years where you have a strong buyer's agent and they are out there hustling and working buyers, and in some cases they're helping 50, 60, 70, 80 families a year purchase a home. So if you're a buyer's agent, you're focused on the buyers, and you're knocking out a lot of transactions, and you're good at talking to people, boy, you can make a lot of money in the business. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, 702-296-9998. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you again.